Oh, it's so much worse than just an Obrez. There's really no historical connection to that's gonna hurt. Would it be awkward to say that the design team clearly put a lot more effort into modeling the testicles than they did to modeling the gun? Hey guys, I'm Ian McCollum. I run ForgottenWeapons.com website and YouTube channel. Today we are taking a look at Mosin Nagant's portrayed in video games. So I haven't played a lot of these games, but I'll be interested to see how the guns are actually shown in them. All right. Oh, Tarkov. Everyone has said I need to look at Escape From Tarkov. This looks like a really well-rendered 9130 PU. The rifle looks correct. The scope mount is accurate. The scope looks correct. This was the standard Soviet version of the Mosin sniper for World War II. Let's see how they actually handle it. Oh, that's kind of cool. Actually see the scope reticle appear and disappear. And it'll go black when it's not exactly in line. And that's remarkably accurate to how this sort of thing actually works. Scopes like this, all scopes have an eye box where if your eye isn't in a specific spatial area behind the lenses, you can't actually see through the scope. And so you will actually see it. You'll see like a black arc on one side or the other, the top or the bottom, as you come near the edge of the eye box of the scope. And they actually rendered that, which is kind of cool. Ooh, okay, reload. That's still faster than most people can pull off actually reloading one of these, but it's a heck of a lot more realistic than most games. And then we come to a Mosin that they've decided to drop into an Archangel stock. It looks like this is mostly actually real aftermarket parts here. So the Archangel stock is that fancy looking or awful looking if you're a fan of historical firearms. Basically, they were marketed to people who could only afford to buy an inexpensive Mosin Nagant and wanted to make it look like a sniper rifle. They did redesign it to take plastic box magazines, which we've got in there. Okay, an NC Star laser. As I recall, NC Star's motto is like the first shot counts, and I think that's because you only get one shot with NC Star before it breaks. Yeah, see, there's no way that you could actually get your eye in this position on that rifle without it being extremely awkward. Probably about the last gun that I would actually want for this sort of shooting. Ooh, blind firing around the corner. Okay. Cycling the bolt here is done properly. So there's that. That is actually real, changing magazines like that with the Archangel stock. That's how that is done. I see we've got a pair of lasers showing up there. Even that's done fairly well. A laser like that in daylight is actually going to be really hard to see. And it looks like they modeled that. It's a little hard to tell from just one little shot there, but it looks like they modeled it pretty well, that once that laser dot gets more than a few dozen yards away from you, it gets pretty darn dim and hard to pick out. Well done. Again, I see why people are talking up Tarkov.
Before we wrap up with Tarkov, I just have one more thing I need to show you.
Oh dear. Oh no. What did they do? Oh, it's a Mosin Obrez. Oh, it's so much worse than just an Obrez. Okay, so Obrez is the name that's been given to a little short pistol version. Well, not even pistol version. It's a rifle that has had the buttstock and the barrel chopped off. And this was most typically done by partisans, guerrillas, people who had no access to handguns and they wanted something concealable, didn't care that it was essentially useless for anything except for very close range. They've lost that historical context on this one. So first off, they have put a front sight back on it, which historically nobody did. And there's no rear sight on it, so the front sight's pointless. There has been some talk about Obrezes being used by actual military forces for things like troops who are digging tunnels in World War I. And there's some anecdotal evidence that it happened here and there, but it was never an official sort of thing. There's no way you could ever shoot this thing accurately. Again, we have an issue of eye box and where your face has to be relative to that scope. And the recoil on a very much lightened Mosin like this that is still firing its full power 7.62x54 cartridge is significant. And if you stick your eyeball up close enough to actually look through that scope, you're going to get a black eye when you fire it. Let me put it this way. If I were actually going to get into a firefight with someone, I would be thrilled if that's the gun that they brought to a gunfight. That's how that would actually go. I had to know there'd be an Obrez in here somewhere.
Taking Alpha.
So we're looking down the sights, which look accurate. Now, okay, first off, when that shot fired, that gun should have recoiled, and it did not, because I was able to watch that enemy target go down right through the sight picture. These rifles have a significant amount of recoil and kick, and that is not modeled here. This would have been a PU sniper. The bent down bolt handle is designed so that it doesn't hit the scope and so that you have a little more leverage on it. Now, normally the way you would reload this thing is with a 5-round stripper clip. And I notice in Insurgency, they don't have stripper clips modeled into the game. The guy's just pulling one cartridge at a time out and loading them into the magazine, which you can certainly do, but I mean, Mosin stripper clips suck, but they're still probably better than single loading the thing. Ah, okay. This again. So once again, the rear sight has been taken off. I'm gonna pause this again. The rear sight's been taken off. They mounted a Picatinny rail in place of the rear sight, which is a real thing, and then mounted a tall red dot mount and some sort of red dot optic. That tall mount is totally counterproductive. If you're actually going to do that, you would want the red dot as low as possible, because it'll never be at the same height as the iron sights. And the height of the iron sights is what the stock is designed for, so that you can actually get the stock in your cheek and get a nice clean line of sight down the sights. So the way this is set up, I want to have my face nice and low on the gun so I can look straight down the sights. If I'm going to replace this with a taller piece of Picatinny rail, now I'm gonna have to kind of stick my chin on the gun to see through the red dot. And if I then if I deliberately then raise the red dot even higher, now maybe it's like bottom of my chin on the stock, or maybe my head just has to kind of float up here above the gun. And if your head isn't in contact with the rifle, it becomes far more difficult to shoot accurately. The more points of contact you have between you and the rifle, the more consistent you're going to be, which means the more accurate you're going to be. That laser is not realistic. So Tarkov looks like it did the laser pretty well, where you can see the dot, but it gets pretty dim pretty quickly. Here, well, it's gone now, but here oh, there's a stripper clip. I don't know why you didn't use a stripper clip the first time. Going back to the laser, that laser beam looks like a lightsaber, and that's not how it works. That's what it would look like, best case, in pitch blackness, not during daylight. That didn't look like a very good representation of the Mosin to me. The basic stuff is is properly modeled, but maybe it's just that I saw Tarkov's rendition first. Tarkov did a really good job with it. And Insurgency did kind of what I would expect with most computer games. The sighting's not really how it would work. The way that the accessories are set up doesn't really make sense. Now, as for a Mosin being in that environment, what I assume is the Middle East, yeah, that's totally realistic. The Soviet Union made so many millions of Mosin Nagant rifles, and then the Chinese did as well, and half a dozen other countries also made them. And then they were supplied as aid because once they became obsolete by the 1950s, 1960s, it's easy stuff to give out as military aid all over the world. And so yes, you will encounter Mosin Nagants everywhere. And in fact, the snipers in particular, because that sniper version is more useful than just a standard infantry rifle, especially for a group that has limited access to modern firearms. Okay, Sniper Elite 4. Got a GI here with a Thompson and a Mosin 9130 PU. Okay, I'm gonna pause this before we even get in. He's done this cool camo wrapping thing, and he has conveniently thoroughly entombed the adjustment knobs on his scope with camo tape, so that if he discovers that he needs to adjust the range, say maybe he's a sniper trying to make a precision long distance shot, he cannot adjust the elevation of his scope because he has wrapped it in mummy wrap. And he also can't adjust the windage should he need to do that. Less likely, but maybe not the best idea. Not convinced that this is in fact an elite sniper that I'm looking at here. This reticle is wrong. The way the PU reticle actually looks is essentially that center post is more or less correct, although it shouldn't have any hash marks on it. The two horizontal bars should be, all three of the bars should be thicker. The horizontal ones should be more thicker. And we got bullet time. Oh, this is like Mortal Kombat, the first-person shooter. This to me is much more along the lines of game where the Mosin, it's just a sniper rifle, and it's modeled as you point the thing at the thing and pull the trigger, and it does a high amount of damage because it's got a low rate of fire. And so there's really no historical connection to that's gonna hurt. Well, it was Hitler, so I guess that's okay. No historical connection to the actual rifle. It's just sort of a totem. Would it be awkward to say that the design team clearly put a lot more effort into modeling the testicles than they did to modeling the gun? All right, looks like that's it for Sniper Elite. Can't say I'm disappointed by that because here we go, Call of Duty Vanguard. Right off the bat, okay, this is a more interesting pattern of Mosin. This looks like it's also pretty darn well rendered. This is the rifle that the Soviet Union had as its actual sniper rifle going into World War II. So 4-power scope, and it is very much along the lines of what the other major powers were doing for sniper rifles. The Soviet Union actually developed a lot of this technology in cooperation with Germany, and it's a really good setup. Let's find out. All right, so they pulled the bolt handle, the bolt open. That is what you would actually see. You can see this big upper lug here that the bolt handle is connected to, which is mysteriously absent in the game's rendering. Sorry, Call of Duty. You've got the good version of the rifle, but that modeling's not so perfect there. Let's keep going. The scope prevents you from being able to fit a stripper clip in. You can see here how the bent bolt handle is really necessary. I would say the standard pattern of the rifle, they've gotten like 80%. Props for picking the right thing in the first place. They modeled it, like the static model looks really good. Maybe I'm missing something in the cycling, but it doesn't look quite right to me. Keeping a sight picture while you cycle the rifle is not correct, not accurate. So it's okay. It's better than Insurgency, not as good as Tarkov. And then we've got whatever this horrible thing is. I'm seeing a stock that's been changed in shape for no reason. There's some sort of bracket on the front, perhaps to mount a bookshelf on the rifle. I guess that's supposed to be some sort of monopod, but it's a really dumb monopod. They've replaced the magazine with what is theoretically, I guess, a detachable magazine. That doesn't actually work that way. We now have a scope offset to the left side of the gun, which allows you space to use a stripper clip, but is objectively a bad idea in every other way. Like, people tried that in World War I and realized it has a lot of downsides, and so they stopped doing it. So that is the customization taken a little too far. But I guess it's a fun thing.
We recorded some gameplay of that Mosin in action. Would you like to see it?
No, I think we're good to just move on. All right, Rising Storm 2. So 2017. So the models aren't quite as crisp as current ones, but it looks like we've got a 9130 PU here, accepting that there's a bit less detail in everything. That looks rendered fairly well. You wouldn't normally put the bayonet on a scoped rifle. So let me pause this for just a moment. There's a sort of well-known thing that, the Russians zeroed their rifles with the bayonet fixed. And that is true, but it does not apply to sniper rifles. A sniper rifle, the whole point of zeroing it with the bayonet fixed is that have the bayonet so that if things get close, the bayonet's already on there. With the sniper rifle, you're not using a bayonet. That's not the point. You're also not using typically the iron sights, which is what would be sighted with the bayonet fixed. You're using the scope. You're going to zero that thing with the bayonet put away somewhere because you're not going to be using it. And the idea that you deliberately hang a 14-inch bayonet off the end of the rifle when you're trying to hold it very steady and make precise shots, you just wouldn't do that. So, and there he goes, putting it right back on the rifle. No, take the bayonet off the rifle. It's dumb. Ooh, okay, I'm gonna pause this while we've got the scope visible, the reticle visible. Okay, actually, I've got a really good shot here that shows both of the dials, and we just saw the reticle a moment ago. And I was gonna say nice things about this, but now I have to take some of them back. So the way the PU actually works, the top dial is your range. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see that well, but that top dial is numbered from 0 out to 13, and that's 1,300 meters. And the way it works is as you increase the range, it actually takes your post reticle in the field of view of the scope and just drops it. So with modern scopes, the crosshairs are always centered in the middle of what you're seeing in the scope. And if you adjust it up or down or left or right, it's moving the entire mechanism in the scope, but leaving the crosshairs in the middle. With a lot of older scopes, like the PU, when you make that adjustment, the scope stays where it is, and it's just moving your crosshairs inside your field of view. And so at a relatively close range, and what we're looking at in the game here is a relatively close range shot, you would expect to see that reticle pretty high up above the center of the field of view of the scope, which they have properly represented, because you need to have enough space to drop that reticle enough to compensate for bullet drop at very long ranges. However, now that I can see what they've done with the dials, the two dials are identical, and it is currently set to 700 meters, which is totally inappropriate and doesn't really fit with the reticle position in that shot. He's putting rounds in one at a time. That's appropriate. He's again doing it awfully fast, faster than most people could actually pull that off with a Mosin, but the idea is correct. You can't use stripper clips because the scope's in the way. I would say this is not bad. The problems modeling the rifle are not so serious, like it's just a couple of scope knobs and you don't see them very often. Other than that, it looks pretty decent. Metal Gear Solid 3, the Tranquilizer sniper rifle. Okay. They have modified the back end of this rifle. The front end looks, from that brief glance, the front end looks normal. Yeah, that's a PU. This is clearly an older game, relatively non-detailed modeling. But given the level of models, or the front end of the rifle looks good. See some glint off the scope. The reticle here looks correct, close enough to correct anyway. Modeling looks pretty good, blocky, but that's because it's an older game. Normally it doesn't put people to sleep. There is no actual historical example of a tranquilizer version of a Mosin Nagant. That's entirely fictional.
The Mosin Nagant has been known far and wide since the war for its superior capabilities.
That's a bit of a stretch.
It was so highly valued that a lot of German snipers on the Eastern Front preferred to use captured Mosin Nagants instead of their own rifles.
That's also a
stretch.
stretch.
Looks like the N took the one he'd been using since the war and modified it to fire tranquilizer rounds.
I think there are a lot of misnomers about tranquilizers in the first place, and you're going to need some sort of syringe sort of mechanism to actually inject something. That is difficult to fit into something as small as a 0.3 inch in diameter barrel. It then also, you're going to be presumably firing it with regular gunpowder. Real tranquilizer dart guns are generally compressed air, because gunpowder is going to have a tendency to create a very high chamber pressure and destroy, or at least damage, your delicate tranquilizer serum injecting thing. It basically, that it's not a thing. I think the Mosin's appearance in video games, aside from things that are set in World War II, where it is the unavoidable historically correct gun, I think most of the time it shows up in popular culture because, at least in the United States, a tremendous number of these rifles came into the country as very cheap surplus. They were accessible to a huge group of people who were interested in historical rifles. And if you couldn't afford anything else, you could get a Mosin Nagant for the cost of like a couple tanks of gas in your car. And so there are a ton of them out there, and they're recognizable by a large group of people who are some of the same people who are playing video games. And so I think it's not so much the historical legacy of the Mosin that has led to them being in the games. I think it is the surplus, the legacy of them being available as guns to people who aren't like deep into it collectors, but people who just want to pick up an interesting historical rifle. The Mosin was easily accessible. And so then they're recognized, and then it becomes a thing of, well, you know, people know these, so let's put them in the game.
For more in this series, make sure to watch our previous videos with Ian when he reacts to the AK-47 in different games.